This summer served as sort of a wake up call for me. While on the outside, I looked extremely physically fit. I was pushing myself through so many different activities, feeling limitless, abundant energy. The truth was, after I did my blood work and really analyzed all these other quote unquote hidden components of health, things were kind of falling apart. Unoptimized hormone levels, cardiovascular disease risk markers, even just the way I felt anxiety and how I was navigating the world, it really made me reframe my approach to health. And I've been on this renewed health journey, which is super neat. And it goes past physical stuff. So, past the actual exercise routine, past the actual diet, past just skincare and dental, past all of that. In fact, I'm spending a lot of time researching best practices backed by science and historians across the world from different tribes and cultures to really understand what are the ways to make the most out of the human experience. So sure, I looked at my DEXA scan, I looked at my body fat percentage, I did the blood work and looked at my vitamin D levels. I analyzed my sleep on my Aura ring. I looked at my strength. I tried to record my mood and feelings of energy. I looked at different types of food and how that affected me. And of course, when we're looking at things in the West predominantly, these are the things that we look at. How many steps are we taking? How do we raise our testosterone levels? Let's see. Do we have any markers for prediabetes? And these are all absolutely important. Looking at your gut, your neurotransmitters, your recovery, any kinds of injuries. These are neat, but I actually found it a little limiting when I was doing some research into blue zones. These are regions with a high concentration of centenarians. These are people living up to 100 years or more, and a notably lower incidence of chronic disease. It was written about by author and explorer Dan Buettner through research with the National Geographic Institute. And the original 5 blue zones were Okinawa, Japan, which is an island community known for its active elderly population and plant-based diet; Sardinia, Italy, which is home to a disproportionately high number of male centenarians who maintain a fairly active lifestyle; Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, a place where people have a lower risk of heart disease and cancer compared to the global average; Ikaria, Greece, an island with low rates of dementia and chronic disease; and Loma Linda in California, where a community of Seventh-day Adventists have an exceptionally long life expectancy. Now, while each of these zones have their unique characteristics, the whole point of the research was that it seemed like there were 9 lifestyle principles that promote longevity and well-being. So number one was the ability to move naturally, right? These folks incorporate regular, low-intensity physical activity into their daily routines rather than structured exercise. Already a very different component than what we're doing here, which is like 5:30 gym class, come back, get back onto the computer, whether it's Netflix or work. All these places had a strong sense of purpose. Uh, their lifestyle is focused on stress reduction. And this is really neat because that's one of the things that I've had a hard time really measuring, but it manifests in physical ways. Stress, as we know, is a silent killer. A lot of them had plant-based diets, which were centered around whole plant-based foods such as beans, grains, and vegetables. I like my meat, but that was an interesting component there. In terms of food, as opposed to here where I feel like so much food is wasted and portion sizes are so big and filling, most of these had a cultural norm of stopping eating when around 80% full. And there's some research to indicate that the the brain tends to receive signals in terms of feeling full long after the stomach is actually full. Interesting. Almost a lot of these cultures had some kind of wine consumption in moderation. They had a strong sense of belonging, which relates to the Rosetta effect, that town, and I believe the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, where it had low incidence of cardiovascular disease besides eating a lot of sugar, not exercising, and having poor quote unquote genetics. There's a strong sense of belonging into the community. It was very church-based. Men played cards together, women cooked together. There were multi-generational households, right? And when that shifted, when people moved out in the 80s, as the American economy boomed, their rates of disease actually matched the rest of the country. They all also belong to a faith-based community, typically with a spiritual component. So it just got me thinking because, of course, I love my weights and my macros, and I used to look at all this stuff as just hippie talk. But the reality is, humans, while we're immortal, we imagine eternity. While we are violent, we dream of peace. While we can be selfish, we tend to sacrifice for others. And ultimately, we're just small animals on a rock in space, but we carry galaxies inside our midst. Because to be human is to create things that don't need to exist. We eat, sleep, fight, mate like any other animal. But we also know we do it and we reflect on it. And it was interesting to see all these components from different cultures of being physically active, but not sedentary or overtrained. Food, both as medicine and as culture, a way to bring people together. Community, always at the center, really hammering the point that we are great apes living in a tribe. Nature as sacred, working with it, part of it instead of trampling on it. Art, using it as a way to heal and connect, right? Things like music, which are universal in terms of how beats affect human movement. Philosophy and spirituality for resilience, right? So I'm going to go through some of these components that I found. The first thing for vitality is movement, and this is kind of an obvious one, but the approach to it might be separate than structured exercise. It's just part of life. So walking after meals, which you've seen in Latin American countries, it's known as paseo. Martial arts and dance seem very common in African and Asian cultures. Daily functional movement, like it's probably not the right term for it, but you've heard of the third world squat, where you, especially you go to Asia and stuff, there's the old dude in full butt to ass to grass squat, smoking a cigarette. That's pretty impressive. Whereas in the West, that is unheard of because we're sitting in chairs where our hamstrings are constantly just contracted, which leads to flexibility issues. Not on to mention the complete lack of steps. People talk about the 10,000 step rule. In some cultures, it's closer to 20,000 actually. Movement can also be playful. So animal movements, acrobatics, like movement is incorporated very much throughout the day in many spurts rather than one focused area, right? I think this is because when movement is removed, it actually leads to a stagnant spirit. The second thing, which again, these are the two kind of obvious ones to me at least, is food. And it's really just considered, as mentioned earlier, medicine, ritual, and culture. It builds communion, it builds community, and it's very different a lot of times than the experience here, which is obviously hyper commercialized. So I notice a lot of cultures have fermented foods for gut health, kimchi, injera, pickles, seasonal local eating, right? Intermittent and ritual fasting. This is something I found across cultures. We all know about Ramzan for Islam and Lent for Christians. Measured eating, which was one of the components of the Blue Zones, seems to be a component of a lot of cultures. Herbs and spices from India. A lot of these have been tied to health benefits and gratitude rituals, actually. I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but the word is itadakimasu. It's a Japanese phrase said before a meal, expressing gratitude and respect for the food and everyone involved in bringing it to the table, from the farmers and fishermen to the chef. I believe it means I humbly receive, but the main point is it's an integral part of Japanese table manners, a way to show grace right before any meal and gratitude for the food, acknowledging that life was sacrificed to provide the meal. This is very much in line with some of the Native American tribes, and when they hunted buffalo, they had similar rituals and they really utilized every piece of the American bison, right? Everything, the hide, the tail, the dung, the horns, and that is completely different than the European settlers, colonizers who came in and shot this creature, which was so prevalent across America, which almost led it to the threat of extinction. So you are not just what you eat, but how and with whom you eat. On this point of eating, it looks like daily flossing, tongue scraping is common in Ayurveda, which is Indian medicine, chewing neem twigs or salt rinses, Fasting will probably give your teeth and digestive system a rest. The ability, hopefully, to not eat super processed food. I mean, I'm learning a lot about the supermarket system here, and it's fascinating, sometimes a little bit disturbing to realize how long food can be packaged, all the hormones and things injected into food to preserve it for longer. And you look at fast food or just food in general, it's just like, man, this is kind of nasty. And I'm guilty of it too. Like I eat protein bars all the time. Mindful chewing, I think that's important because there's research that I'm looking into now, which indicates that chewing is actually a helpful part of developing your jaw musculature and developing breathing patterns for you at night based on the strength of the muscles around the jaw. And that's kind of slipping away because our food is kind of a lot of times easy to eat, and we drink a lot of it too, right? I'm guilty of that as well with protein shakes. And it looks like some of the spices I mentioned earlier, like herbs, are really good digestive aids. There's also a focus on our largest organ, the skin, which is both a barrier and a mirror. In Ayurveda, again, there's Abhyanga, which is self-oil massage. Uh, in our culture, there's something that is pretty good, which is SPF. Okay, you do need your sunscreen. Um, Saunas, steam, hammam, you'll see that in Finland and Turkey. And there are a lot of benefits to sweating and increasing your body temperature. And it looks like a lot of cultures have clay and charcoal cleansing. Hygiene in general, just using a bath is an important part. I'm glad that seems fairly universal. But now here comes some of the things that, again, I don't think we think about, and maybe I'm just thinking about myself here. And these are the things after going through the first components of health that I felt like were really about me, the individual, really thinking about just my place in terms of my mind, my body, my spirit. Okay, we got a couple of those things, but now we start exploring some of the things that are a little bit larger in terms of how I interact with other people. And something that's super important is, as great apes, isolation kills. It's why one of the worst punishments for someone is solitary confinement, where you're just confined into a box. I'm not saying that these people don't deserve it, but you're confined in a box without any social interaction. That's tough. And guess what? That's happening voluntarily right now. There are whole generations of kids that can access the world digitally. They do not need to go downstairs to interact with someone for food. They can press it at the point of a button. They can get into a car with a stranger to drop them off somewhere without even saying any words. They can get all the entertainment they want. They can do their homework. They can find love online, find connection. It's very interesting because there are a tremendous amount of differences in terms of finding community online and in person. And lack of physical contact, lack of in-person interaction, especially post-COVID, I think has been overall damaging to a whole generation of kids who now lack a lot of the basic fundamental interaction principles they need, which have been fractured, it seems, by constant dopamine hits that compete for their attention. So the reality is social connection is everything. It's one of the longest studied and well-known predictors of longevity. So things like communal meals, tea ceremonies, shared rituals, whether it's through religion, a martial brotherhood. So the concept of having some kind of mm, step into adulthood, right? Intergenerational storytelling, like talking about your grandparents. And that's kind of how myths came about, like these oral traditions that build a sense of community that's larger than one. I think, when I was in Africa, I was meeting tribes. And one of the phrases that was loosely translated was something along the lines of, I am because we are, right? Hugging, dancing, group singing, like these things that really release oxytocin, lower stress, unite us, allow us to be more than just animals, right? That's the whole point of being a human is we're able to access the knowledge, services, resources, wisdom of other people to become something greater as a species. Yeah, that's important. Brotherhood, sisterhood, relationships. they really do matter. I think the tribe is the original biohack because even if you're struggling with all these things, whether it's movement or food or purpose, it looks that social connection can really help fill in that gap. Air quality, and when we're looking at the environment, your breath is spirit. We need these gases. We breathe around 20,000 times a day. The quality definitely matters. And really understanding your breath can have outsized effects on your ability to withstand stress. Just look at the Wim Hof method, right? This gentleman that's able to withstand extreme temperatures by controlling his breathing. You look at the way people breathe in yoga, pranayama, like this allows the body to calm down and center itself. So, of course, I think understanding that we need houseplants and purifiers and understanding how to breathe through our nose. Nasal breathing is considered extremely useful and important in everything from exercise to recovery. Then we look at light. A lot of cultures, it's interesting, before the advent of electricity, humans might have been sleeping polyphasically, actually. So they could have been sleeping maybe right around evening time, wake up in the middle of the night. They could potentially meet with the neighbors, eat another meal, and then go back to sleep afterwards. Now, very much, we're on this factory system where there's just artificial light all the time. And I'm not just talking about from light bulbs, from our screens that we use all day, right? And that really affects our circadian rhythm because light affects time, affects hormones, affects health, right? Our perception of time. So the sun is helpful in terms of waking us up. I think overhead lights are helpful in terms of waking us up and making us alert. But then when it interferes with sleep quality is when it's still overhead. And that's where things like candles or low lights, right? Fire, red light therapy in the evening, blackout curtains or eye masks help us reach that deep sleep. I'm guilty of this. Like, this is one of the first things that I really needed to focus on in terms of my recovery was, is my nighttime routine, the things that I do, are they actually conducive to keeping me safe, or am I still just wired in some way? And what can we do? We're constantly bombarded with notifications with the light. These things are designed to keep us hooked, right? They do not care whether or not we are recovered, whether or not we're sleeping. And you need to really make a conscious effort to, yeah, put it away. I mean, one thing I'm really doing and focusing on is being on do not disturb for as much time as possible. I know that sounds crazy because I run an entrepreneurship center, but man, the time away, I don't miss it. And I feel just almost a sense of relief when I can't find my phone on the weekends. But throughout the week, when I'm constantly using it, the anxiety returns. I need to check this. I need to refresh. I am in line. I need to check it. And not being burdened by that allows me to think about things like this, to create instead of consume. And I think these things, it's tough because this is kind of how our nervous system works, like understanding biologically how humans work. So, for example, another component is how we respond to sound, right? Rhythm is primal. Like babies bump around to different beats. So sacred sounds like mantras, chanting, binaural beats, these are seen across many different cultures. And conscious silence. Seriously, when's the last time you've actually been silent doing nothing? Like true Vipassana meditation or being immersed in nature. Because the thing is, not only are we being inundated digitally, almost all the things in our life have sounds. Ding, ding, ding. Like always competing for our attention, right? Light ambient chaos, tribal drumming, dance beats for flow states, nature soundscapes for sleep. And music really brings out this other side that, I think I've been suppressing for a while. And we just talk about it, this creation. I feel like I'm guilty of it, just being consumed by being productive. I got to do this. I need to do this. I need to make the most out of every single moment here, right? And then, what's the point of play? My parents didn't allow me to have a cell phone when I was a kid, and growing up in the 90s, you know, I'm thinking about what I did. I would read books, and then after I read all the books, I'd make a tower with them. I'd go outside, play in the dirt, create little missions and forts. I'd go out and play with kids and sometimes get bullied, sometimes deal with difficult things, but I was out and about. And you see, it was uninterrupted, unstructured playtime. And what is that? That's non productive joy, just doing for the sense of happiness. And now, I'm ashamed to say this, but I almost view it. One of my co-founders used to say this. He's like, "You need unstructured playtime." I'm like, "No, that's childish." It's not. It's actually a safe environment where you can almost simulate real world things without huge consequences. It's where healing, bonding, and creativity happen. When you're bored, when you have time to think, right? Painting, poetry, singing, instrument play, physical play, whether it's wrestling or games like chess, climbing, dance as expression, movement as the true self, improv, acting, cosplaying, storytelling, that all ties into the intergenerational storytelling that we talked about earlier, and which dives into myth, fantasy, and fiction as emotional metaphors for us to describe the whole human experience. Man, play is important, and you know what? I think it ties into the communal aspect. I think it ties into that low intensity physical movement. And it is something that I will be incorporating. And I do, you know. I dance and I play billiards and I bike around and I do yoga, but a lot of these are very structured. I'm going to be working on how to incorporate these things into daily life, right? In some ways, actually, here's a great quote. Einstein said this: play is the highest form of research. That's cool. Now, we talked about all these things, and I think behind or underlying it all is just this question of why, right? At least that's my question. As a human being, I'm just like, why? What's the point? All these questions about how to optimize or how to live the best is because I'm trying to figure it out, just like all of us, life. Meaning gives energy and vision keeps the soul alive. You see, purpose and philosophy, whether you want to call it ikigai or dharma, these are frameworks that I think that transcend all of this, whether it's physical, communal, food, all these things, to really anchor us and give intentionality into everything that we do. So at the end of our short time here on earth, we can look back and be like, yeah, that was awesome. Right. I have a good friend who's very successful at a big American bank. And he really explained to me ikigai, the Japanese concept, which really means your reason to live, or a reason, perhaps more accurately, for being. It's the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. But it also broadly can mean anything that brings value and joy into your life. And he's dedicated his life, despite his immense success, to the betterment of others, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds, right? And this is sometimes diametrically opposed to the Western ideal of finding a dream career at the intersection of these four elements. The Japanese philosophy emphasized finding purpose in smaller, everyday, simple joys, not just grand passions, right? It's like the concept of chivalry, which was the medieval knightly system of behavior that combined courage, honor, justice, and a readiness to help the weakest alongside courteous conduct, right? It encompasses a warrior ethos, just like Bushido in Japan for the samurai. And it showcases strength, bravery, skill in battle, perhaps masculine qualities like courage and showing bravery and a readiness to defend, honor, living a life worthy of respect and upholding principles, loyalty. This is tied into the Indian concept of dharma, which I guess roughly translates to what is established or the way things are, referring to your duty, what is morally right, and the right way of living, right? Social order, shaped by personal inclinations, your stage in life. universal moral values? How can you live in harmony with the world, others, and yourself, right? This is completely tied into the way we practice sculpture and how we look at ourselves as warriors in India. Existentialism, choosing meaning in absurdity, like all this stuff, none of this really makes sense. We're trying to make meaning out of it. And I think this has been one of the most powerful frameworks in terms of living your life. It's just, you really got to think about it. It's got to make sense for you, because once you start asking these questions, starting to think about it, yeah, every little thing that you do throughout the day has meaning. And you might find that you're doing less in some ways, but that you're getting more out of it. And that's been really, really refreshing for me. The ability to cut out people that are just glorified acquaintances. The ability to say no to things that I don't want to do. The ability to double down on the things that I love. And this, of course, has an immense effect on emotional and mental health, because suppressed emotions become illnesses. You need processing to bring freedom. Okay, and a lot of cultures emphasize journaling, whether it's gratitude or shadow work, stream of consciousness, writing. We talked about meditation. Yeah, absolutely. Therapy has its place. So does confession and honest friendship. The ability to have people in your corner that don't judge you and are there for you. And self-dialogue. Like, in some ways, this is a form of that for me: naming, accepting, integrating, sharing, thinking. And it gets you to think about all these things, right? Another component, or second to last one, would be integration with nature, not just domination. Looking at the earth not as a resource, but as a relationship. And that's been really neat. And I am probably farthest away from this, right, as our planet burns. But really, really being thoughtful about sustainability and living with the ecosystem. So I've been doing quite a bit of research on sustainable farming practices, growing our own produce, living in harmony with creatures. And yeah, no, it seems like a peaceful, meaningful, unwasteful way of living. And I'm getting excited about it. I don't know how realistic it is. There's a lot of things that I like and want and need, and especially if you live in a city, space is limited. But man, I honestly would not mind um, some agriculture in my backyard. And I think tying it all up is perhaps this spiritual component, and this goes through all of it, I think. Non-attachment. There's this Buddhist concept, anicca, which means impermanence. It's the fundamental characteristic of all existence that emphasizes the constantly changing nature of all physical and mental phenomena. I mean, that's the only constant is change. The natural state of order of things in our universe is disruption. So there is no permanent core or lasting self. And once you really understand that, once you observe the present through practices like meditation, you can observe the constant arising and dissolving of sensations, thoughts, and emotions to cultivate deeper understanding of the things around you. Once you understand that, you reduce attachment. There's a reason I'm a minimalist, because a lot of things really don't matter, right? Reducing our attachment to possessions, status, right? Even our own self-concept. These can all lead to suffering. And for what? They're all made up things. And cultivating wisdom and flexibility by embracing the transient nature of life and death hopefully gives you some peace of mind in navigating difficulties. And I know I've heralded to quite a few Asian cultural practices here. I do want to add another one because they're just so good. This is wabi-sabi. It's a Japanese philosophy that finds beauty in imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness, embracing the natural process of aging and decay. This is from a culture that is notoriously well structured. Everything has meaning, right? And this was so interesting because in a culture where everything has so much ritual and thought and intentionality put into it, this wabi sabi encourages an appreciation for simplicity, modesty, and authenticity, offering an alternative to the modern pursuit of perfection, right? So this can be seen in the art of kintsugi, which mends broken pottery with gold. So it just naturally looks imperfect. And it's a key component that's been included in architecture. And I thought this was really nice because this concept can be applied to how we think about ourselves, because no one is perfect. And guess what? That is the nature of things. That's the nature of life. Um, that's authentic. And in the West, there's some good stuff too. Memento mori, this Latin phrase, it literally means remember that you must die, or remember death. It's a symbolic reminder of mortality. And I think it originated from I want to say a Roman slave that whispered this to a successful victorious general. Remember that you are mortal, to keep him grounded and prevent hubris. Because all things, good or evil, come to an end. Like this podcast. I'll see you guys in the next one.